What's going on, everyone? A traditional build log will take place in this video today. The total price coming in at around 560 USD, so if you're interested in a budget-oriented system, this video might be for you. Now, I have some older hardware, like the GTX 760 I purchased from a fellow Patreon, actually, for about 60 bucks, and then we have a Ryzen 3 1200 processor, comes in around $90, that's new. We have an ASRock AB350 Gaming 4, that's about 100 bucks or so. We have an older Corsair power supply, the RM750X, with some used red sleeve cables. We have 8 gigs of T-Force DDR4 from Team Group. This comes in about 100 bucks, and of course we want to upgrade that later to 16, but for now 8 in a budget system is just fine. Oh yeah, the big case back there, this is actually from Aerocool. This is what they call the Cylon. It comes in about 50 to 60 bucks, certainly nothing too fancy. It is a budget oriented case, and that's why it's in this video, but it does still have some quality features like RGB accents up front that you can control with a dedicated switch up here. You even get, look at this, an SD card reader, both a full-size SD card as well as a micro SD card reader built into the system. You have a power button, reset switch, all the goodies up top, and yeah, I mean, it's pretty bare bones in there, but that's of course what you get when you buy a cheap case like this most of the time. No tempered glass. We do have an acrylic side panel though, so we can see our goodies inside. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and start throwing things in here, and then we'll get to benchmarking and see just how well this system performs. So I was pleasantly surprised by how well this PC performed given its price tag and how old the graphics card is. The 4 gig buffer and the 760 definitely came through. It allowed us to bump in-game settings just a bit more than we otherwise would have been able to, and my target was around 60 FPS, so a few games fell short of that, and a few games surpassed that, by quite a bit. So it really depends on the title, and I try to keep those in-game settings as consistent as possible with my previous benchmarks, so if you want to go back and look at those and see how my previous builds compare to this one, you're more than welcome to do that. I'll link a few of those videos down below. The first game I tested was PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. This one's by far the most popular out there on the PC side of things, and believe it or not, people are actually building PCs strictly for PUBG gaming. So I wanted to test this one first, see if it hit the mark or not. And across the board, I had settings set to medium, except for foliage, which is set to very low, and then view distance set to very high. And my average frame rate for this build came out to 50 FPS. I was actually pretty impressed with that. That's not bad for a 1080p resolution, which is pretty common. That dropped to 40 FPS for the lowest 1% of frames and 29 for the lowest 0.1% of frames. So we're still staying above 30 FPS, or right at 30 FPS for even the worst case scenario, which I would deem playable still. I mean, that's going to be better than what you're going to see on consoles for the most part. And at 50 FPS for the average, still really good considering we have our settings in game at pretty modest presets. I would say medium is a pretty fair comparison because it's going to be a run-of-the-mill setting that most people would use in game. GTAV and Rise of the Tomb Raider performed in a similar fashion to PUBG, which I was fairly impressed with. That means that PUBG's come a long way from an optimization standpoint. City Skylines and Universe Sandbox 2 were the worst performers, but these are very CPU intensive, so our Ryzen 3 1200 CPU here was choked quite a bit. Witcher 3 was by far our most graphics intensive game, so that's where the 760 4 gig model becomes our bottleneck, and the best performer overall was Doom, but this game is just excellent in OpenGL. In a general sense, these frame rate trends are fairly impressive. We have a 2-gen old NVIDIA card in here. It's not even a very powerful one. You think about it, like the 960, right, from Maxwell it was good enough for 1080p, and that was really about it. If you went to 1440p territory, you'd have to really dumb down settings. And the 760 was a worse performer than the 960 was, just as a progression. And the 760 here is doing very well with its 4 gig buffer. I'm really glad we opted for that again, just because we can bump in-game settings where applicable. Like with Doom, I was testing this in the Ultra preset, and we were using around 4 gigs of VRAM there. GTA 5, we also bordered on 4 gigs of RAM. So if you're looking for a used card, which I recommend in this hostile market for graphics cards in particular, I recommend at least 4 gigs of memory, because more demanding games are released every day, and you're going to be using more of that memory buffer. Despite having to dumb down some settings, just in general, even with the low presets, you might still be using close to 4 gigs of RAM, so it's more or less becoming the minimum, I would say, in 2018. Kind of want to call this one the sleeper build, because if you just look at it from the outside, it doesn't look too impressive, although I do like the color coordination we've got going on inside. But if you look at the price tag, right, $500-600 USD, you're going to think, okay, well, this thing's going to barely push out 1080p games and some pretty low in-game settings, but it actually does fairly well considering how much we spent on the graphics card for one, $60. I'll admit that's a bit low for the the typical asking price for a 760, especially the 4 gig model. But if you can find a deal like that, maybe got a friend who has an old card that he's not using anymore, you can maybe pitch him $50, $100 for it if it's a good one. Then that's something that will get you your foot in the door, right, to PC gaming. You won't have to spend a ton of money on inflated graphics cards now. As usual, you can find global links to all of the parts used in this build in the video description. I've also tied a few eBay listings in there for graphics cards in particular, because I recommend buying used right now in today's market unless you buy a pre-built or something that already comes packaged with the graphics card. That's about the only time you'll really get a discount on those, or a discount off of the inflated MSRPs, I guess I should say. Similar graphics cards for the red team would consist of maybe like the R7 360, R7 370, the R9 280. You get my drift, right? The cards that were brand new, maybe $200 or so, that are right now still around $200 or so, because people are asking outrageous sums of cash for them because they are selling at that price thanks to mining. But if you want to spend around that much money and get a card like that, you'll certainly save a lot of money, especially if you don't want to spend $800 on a GTX 1070, which would be a really good bang for the buck graphics card. In today's market, that just doesn't exist. So until those prices drop, used is the way to go. Again, around R7 370 territory for the AMD side, and then something something like a GTX 760, maybe a 960 or a 970 from NVIDIA would be a great entry-level graphics card from NVIDIA's side. If you like this video, be sure to let me know by giving this one a thumbs up. I appreciate a thumbs down. For the opposite, click subscribe button if you haven't already. Stay tuned for more content like this. This is Science Studio. Thanks for building with us.